Hello, Andrew Day.
Hey Bob,
How you doing?
I'm doing good, feeling good. This is our, I think, first time recording one of these when we're not putting out or scrambling to put out the Earthling, which is the weekend edition of the Nonzero Newsletter on Substack. So my mind feels pretty clear. How are you doing?
You make it sound unusual that your mind feels clear, Andy.
It is a little
Um,
unusual.
I'm doing okay, and you're right. Normally, this podcast, the every so often podcast, Earthling Unplugged, accompanies and supplements an issue of the Earthling, the Friday edition of Nonzero Newsletter. However, the newsletter itself has taken the month of June off, and accordingly, by the way, we've I don't know what the formal term is. It amounts to paid subscribers getting not having to pay for a month or getting an extra month or something.
Right.
Anyway, uh, we are persisting with the podcast generally. I mean, not this one as much, but my regular podcast schedule. There's still a couple a week on the feed. Got some good ones coming up. Um, but we thought that we would tape this as a way of just kind of checking in, saying we're still here. The Earthling will be back after the 4th of July. And this is also a good way to ground me in current events. I mean, the idea is we'll talk about some of the kinds of things that might have been in the Earthling, had there been an issue of the Earthling this week. And that'll be a help to me because I spent 8 days at a silent meditation retreat, came back last week, and I'm still, I'm kind of in low Earth orbit and heading toward terra firma.
Right. Have you talked about the meditation retreat yet on the podcast? Have listeners already
A
heard you talk
little
about it?
bit, a little bit with Paul Bloom, that posted a couple days ago. Um, he made fun of how little I sounded like somebody who'd just been on a meditation retreat. how excitable I remained. Um, I talked to him about walking meditation in particular, which is, too little is said about walking meditation. Have you ever tried to do walking meditation?
I
Here's
haven't.
the deal. Here's the deal. You walk slowly, and you try to be conscious for starters of every time your a foot impacts the ground, of the feel of that, the precise feel.
Hmm.
You go heel to ball or whatever, and you any subtle, you step on a crack, you feel that. Um, and then having mastered that, you try to be conscious of the intervening things like the one foot moving forward before you plant it. Um, and in doing this, you can like just stop, like, okay, I planted my foot, stop. Now I'm going to think about raising my other foot. And then you slowly get maybe a little more fluid at it. I'm increasingly thinking that it's actually an easier way for some people to get a little bit of the mind settling effect of meditation than sitting down and trying to focus on your breath or something, which is very hard for some people, including me.
Yeah, I've been focusing less on my breath, and I mean, I don't meditate as much as you, but every now I do, and now I focus more on sounds. I do find it more
I,
helpful.
I like sounds. I like
Hmm.
sounds. Yeah. I used to have a thing where it was breath on the inhale and then sounds on the exhale. I did that for a while.
Right.
But we digress. I mean, there's current events.
There are, yeah. We wanted to talk about Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, artificial intelligence, possibly the European elections, possibly Hunter Biden. We'll see. On Israel, Palestine, and Russia, Ukraine, it kind of feels like a lot of things have been happening. There's a lot of things to discuss, but the fundamental situations haven't changed in both cases. A ceasefire still seems kind of far off. The war is still going on. But I mean, starting with Israel, Palestine, there's a bunch of stuff we can discuss in addition to the Gaza war. Like it looks like there might be a war, this kind of low grade conflict between Hezbollah and Lebanon and Israel seems to be
Hmm.
intensifying. It's heating up, threatening an all out war, which would put Israel in a two front war, which is not recommended by most military historians.
No,
Uh,
but possibly recommended by Bibi Netanyahu political strategists. I don't mean they're actually recommending it, but it's funny. I had an exchange yesterday with Ron Campius on Twitter of the JTA, and he's a great journalist who's covered this stuff for a long time. And he was saying, I'm not sure Bibi can last as prime minister through, there was some date in July. And I said, well, couldn't war with Hezbollah be his new get out of jail free card? And Ron said that's kind of alarming, especially given that Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has his own political insecurities. So he might benefit from a conflict. But, Israel, I don't know how long ago it was. It was a few days ago. They assassinated this senior commander, and I didn't think this of Hezbollah and a
Hmm.
few other senior officers in a house. Okay, this wasn't like in the course of normal military battle. These guys got killed. It was an assassination. They struck a house, and it got a certain amount of attention in some circles, but I felt kind of the way I did when they struck, the Iranian diplomatic compound, which
Mm.
was, and that got a lot more attention. People recognized that as a clear escalation, but I still said I don't think it's getting enough attention. And it did lead to the brink of war, as you may recall, uh, with Iran retaliating pretty forcefully. And I think this is has gotten almost no attention and deserves more because it's more of a clear escalation than just like launching more rockets or something.
Right.
It's kind of a next level thing. And I mean, I don't mean that Israel hasn't done it in the past, but it's a kind of thing that Hezbollah, whether because they can't do it or whatever, doesn't do. They don't like assassinate. I mean, lately they haven't assassinated uh Israeli military commanders. So I worry about that. And there's more and more discussion of the possibility of war, of course, between Hezbollah and Israel. And look, Bibi, I mean, politically could help him. Strategically, you might think, why would he want a two-front war, even in effect a three-front war, since this could draw Iran in? But I think they feel, look, as long as America's here, it's maybe a good opportunity to get some stuff done that we want to do. We'd like to have Iran's nuclear facilities bombed. We'd like to destroy a lot of Hezbollah, uh, stuff and people. Um, it, I don't know, but I'm inclined to worry about these things. I'm sure you can calm me down about this. It's not going to happen, right?
Oh, I don't intend to calm you down. I mean, did you see this drone footage that Hezbollah released? And it was over Haifa, the northern port city. And it was basically their way of saying, we know the strategic targets, the military targets in Haifa and presumably across Israel. Hezbollah is different than Hamas. It's a more serious, much better equipped military organization. This would be a much more difficult war if war was indeed to break out. I mean, they have like not just rockets that they can lob over, they have like precision guided long range missiles, and apparently they know the strategic targets around Israel. I don't know how they were able to fly a drone over. It's not clear that this was a recent drone flight, but I think that's what Hezbollah is claiming. And then I think you probably saw some member of the Israeli government. I think the foreign minister has been talking pretty tough on Twitter, saying that Israel is preparing an offensive. They will destroy Hezbollah if needed. So I definitely think this could break out into a war. And when you refer to the Hezbollah leaders, political pressure, do you just mean that like people below him want Hezbollah to do more to confront Israel given the war in
I,
Gaza?
I don't know the politics that well. I took it to mean that there's a more broad-based insecurity. Lebanese politics are very complicated. You've got a kind of a formal division of power among the factions. I guess it's basically, what is it? Christians and kind of Shia and Sunni. Is that's the thing. But anyway, of course, Hezbollah is Shia based. And I don't know what exactly Ron meant, but he knows the territory. And, I mean, the good news is a lot of people in Lebanon, certainly including a lot of Christians, probably do not want Nasrallah to
Mm.
get Israel to ravage Lebanon again, which has happened in the past. So that's probably a good thing. By the way, the name of the guy they assassinated was Taleb Sami Abdallah. The Wall Street Journal says, uh, or wait, yeah. He is reportedly the most senior Hezbollah commander eliminated by Israel since the outbreak of war. So this is a new high. And I guess we'll see. But, this would be much harder on Israel, as you just said, than a war with Gaza.
Mhm.
And so American involvement might become much more extensive. There would be a lot of pressure on Biden domestically to get involved more deeply and maybe actually do, I don't know, strikes somewhere or other. Certainly, if Iran got involved, there would be a ton of pressure for the
Mhm.
U.S. to directly strike Iran. It has some strike capabilities that I think Israel doesn't have with respect to Iran. And, but, you know,
Some other Israel-Palestine stuff that we might talk about. Well, first there was this Wall Street Journal report on Sinwar, the leader of Hamas within Gaza. I think you wanted to say something on that. We might also
yeah,
talk about how the war cabinet dissolved because Benny Gantz left, and so Netanyahu dissolved the war cabinet.
yeah. I mean, also this morning, the news is that there's been it's being played as some kind of split between, or a split going public between Bibi and the military, because the military spokesman came out and said, look, you're not going to destroy Hamas. And Bibi, the prime minister's office, pushed back. And of course, a lot of people were saying that from the beginning. But the virtue from Bibi's point of view, as a political matter, of the goal of destroying Hamas is precisely that you can't do it.
Mm.
And from the beginning, people were saying once this war is over, he's going to have to step down as prime minister. And so he came up with a goal that's unreachable, and it's a recipe for permanent war. But so that's now the military's publicly saying, look, this ain't working. We need a plan for a post-war Gaza that will have a stabilizing effect. And Gaza's, falling more and more apart. It's more and more like a gangland. I read this morning that although Israel paused and let some aid trucks over the border into Gaza, they're just sitting there because nobody in the international aid business wants to be associated with them, because they know what's going to happen is these armed gangs are going to seize them, and because order has broken down.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's kind of a mess. It's good that Bibi's getting heat from the military, I guess. Um,
Yeah, it's kind of his Milley moment. If you think back to when Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint
mm,
Chiefs of Staff, you've talked about this a lot, was saying now is the time to have a peacefire or a peace deal with Russia. Ukraine's military position is probably not going to improve. This was right after Ukraine did better than most people expected, and defending its territory and repelling the Russian invaders. Most people were in an exuberant mood and wanted to keep going. Milley was saying that's not going to work. It's kind of similar. This,
mhm.
I guess, in this case, it's just like a military spokesperson, not someone of such high status as Mark Milley was at the time,
Yeah, and
but there,
somebody, right after Milley said that, somebody wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post saying, yeah, Biden should push Zelensky to cut a deal that would do Zelensky a favor by taking, the political heat off of him. Who was it? Do you remember who wrote that, Andrew? I'm trying to think.
I don't read that rag.
You're
I have no
drawing a
idea.
blank. Oh
Yeah.
wait, it was me. It was me. I'm sorry. I remembered. It was me. Um. So, but it's unlike me to dwell on that.
Do you have a good
The
sense of what the implications are and what the consequences will be of this war cabinet dissolving? I don't know enough about Israeli politics to say. Benny Gantz was exercising a kind of moderating influence. He was saying something similar to what this military spokesperson is saying, that, Netanyahu needs an exit plan or else he's going to leave the war cabinet. The exit
mhm,
plan wasn't forthcoming. He left the war cabinet. I think Ben Gvir wanted to be on the war cabinet. It could have gone in a
right.
more hardline direction. So in that sense, it's probably good that it got dissolved. But what do you think?
Yeah, I've heard that dissolving it was preferable from the point of view of people like us, I guess, to doing what might otherwise might have otherwise been forced to do, which is let uh, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, these two hardline cabinet members, get involved in the war cabinet. Probably true. On the other hand, they have a kind of veto power. But they can't, of course, exercise it in a fine-grained way. So it's kind of less influence than they might have had in the war cabinet. But when they threaten to leave the coalition, he's got to take that. That would bring him down. Whereas Gantz leaving the coalition didn't bring him down, but these guys could, and that accounts for some of probably his more hardline stuff in Gaza. The fact that he's got to appease these guys.
Yeah, did you see this video of Smotrich walking down the street and just there? It was like it was the Beatles or something. There was just this like throng of young women like smiling and trying to get pictures with him. It was like he was a celebrity. It kind of illuminated for me how he must be feeling and the kind of people he must be trying to appeal to. Yeah, and I can see kind of better why the American pressure, such as it is, hasn't been working. Because apparently there's a lot of counter pressures from Israeli society. Anything else on Israel-Palestine?
There is. So the Wall Street Journal piece, I did want to talk about that a little. I have a little bit of media criticism about that. So the piece was, and this is actually, it's been, I don't know, it's a couple of weeks old or something, but I haven't, well, actually it happened while on retreat. I heard about it on some podcast after I got back from the retreat. And headline is Gaza Chief's Brutal Calculation, Civilian Bloodshed Will Help Hamas. It's about Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza. And the subhead is Yahya Sinwar's correspondence with compatriots and mediators shows he is confident that Hamas can outlast Israel. And I have like two criticisms. One is like, really, well, they got a hold of these apparently, intercepted communications. That's important stuff. Okay. I have two complaints. One is, why don't they show us more of it? Why don't they show us all of it? The New York Times recently had a piece. I forget what it was about, but they did that. They said, we got a hold of all these documents. Click here. Here they all are.
Yeah, that was about the Russia-Ukraine peace negotiations.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Why doesn't the Journal do that? And then you can judge. Here's our story, assessing the significance of it. And here are the documents, and you can judge, because there's only a couple of fragmentary quotes that you don't know the context of. I mean, I don't doubt that they're more or less representative, but A, why not show us this? And then B, they found something in these documents that is buried in the piece that I think is more interesting than the lead. Okay, so here's the lead angle is, for months, Yahya Sinwar has resisted pressure to cut a ceasefire and hostage deal with Israel. Behind his decision, messages the Hamas military leader in Gaza has sent to mediators show. I think technically he's actually the political leader in Gaza, but anyway, he certainly does command the military as well. Anyway, behind his decision, his message show is a calculation that more fighting and more Palestinian deaths work to his advantage. So the takeaway is, well, I don't want to read too much into it, but certainly one thing that got this traction in certain circles is that you can say he's such a horrible person that he welcomes Palestinian civilian deaths, not just Israeli deaths. So that gave it some legs. The quotes, look, broadly speaking, of course, he's cold-blooded, calculating, fanatic who is willing to countenance a lot of death for his cause. There's no doubt about. So in that sense, it's kind of right. But they don't come up with a quote where he specifically says, all these Palestinians dying are worth it. It's quote, we have the Israelis right where we want them. The closest they have is this. In one message to Hamas leaders, Sinwar cited civilian losses in national liberation conflicts in places such as Algeria, where hundreds of thousands of people died fighting for independence from France, saying these are necessary sacrifices. So he says that about Algeria. And look, I don't doubt that he's saying that to himself now about these civilian sacrifices. I don't doubt it at all. But it's just funny that the part that they kind of buried, which I'll get to now, in some ways almost works in the other direction, right? So they're taking these fragmentary quotes, not showing us the context, to paint him as a monster in ways that, broadly speaking, I don't doubt the accuracy of, okay, but that also, by the same token, aren't super surprising. And then here's what is buried, okay? So down many paragraphs, the journal writes, though Sinwar planned and green-lighted the October 7th attacks, early messages to ceasefire negotiators show he seemed surprised by the brutality of Hamas's armed wing and other Palestinians. And again, I don't think he's the military commander. Anyway, surprised by the brutality of Hamas's armed wing and other Palestinians and how easily they committed civilian atrocities. And then here's a quote from him. Things went out of control, unquote, Sinwar said in one of his messages, referring to gangs taking civilian women and children as hostages. Quote, people got caught up in this and that should not have happened. That's what he said. Now, he has in the past, I think, said things kind of like this in public, but for all we know, that's bullshit. That's for public presentation. That's PR. There is real news here because he was saying this in what he thought was a private communication to confidants. That's new. To my mind, that's a bigger story than the kind of like, you know, he's rationalizing the death of all these Gazan civilians. Of course, he's going to rationalize them now that he's responsible for them. A bigger question would be, did he anticipate this as a consequence of the attacks? And now we get to more reason to think the answer is no. By the way, this let me just complain about this a little. Right after that quote, so again, he says, you know, people got caught up in this. That should not have happened. Things went out of control. The significance of this, again, is we can believe that he believes it. But the next thing the journal writes is, this became a talking point for Hamas to explain away the October 7th civilian toll. So they're actually undermining the actual significance of the thing, right? They're kind of vaguely, we're back in this is just a talking point territory, whereas the story is the exact opposite. You know,
right? It's that the talking point is sincere.
Right. This is not the way a true reportorial journalist handles information. I mean, this became a talking point to explain away. It did, but you're kind of obscuring the significance of this, which is that we now know it wasn't just a talking point. He believes it. Okay. And now, after this, the journal writes, early in the war, Sinwar focused on using the hostages as a bargaining chip to delay an Israeli ground operation in Gaza. Now, first of all, one reason I'd love to see the documents is I'd like to see, do we have him saying, I want to delay an Israeli ground operation? I'll bet we don't. Okay? I'll bet, and I've said this from the beginning, he thought that all those hostages were going to allow him to indefinitely forestall an invasion or minimize its magnitude. I've been saying from the beginning, look, Israel has in the past traded 1,000 prisoners for one hostage. So of course he thought, if we get 100 hostages, we'll be in the driver's seat.
Yeah, he was himself a prisoner in one such swap.
He was, yeah. I mean, that was a bigger release. So anyway, let me read so it says, early in the war, Sinwar focused on using the hostages as a bargaining chip to delay an Israeli ground operation. A day after Israeli soldiers entered the Strip, Sinwar said Hamas was ready for an immediate deal to exchange its hostages for release of all Palestinian prisoners, blah, blah. But Sinwar had misread how Israel would react to October 7th. That's true. Good observation. Netanyahu declared Israel was going to destroy Hamas and said the only way to force the group to release a hostage was through military pressure. I think that's right. And the upshot, I mean, again, I don't think he was just wanted to slow down, put off a ground operation. I think Sinwar had bigger ideas. But the point is, he did not plan for nearly this many Gazan civilians to die. And I'm not, so in a certain sense, this, works at least slightly against the overall, he's a monster who will, and again, yeah, cold-blooded, mass killer, fanatic, no doubt. But I really think they buried the lead, which is that the atrocities, at least on that scale, were not part of the plan. Now, and this may be even more of an indictment in a sense, because it means that there were
That's what I was going to say.
a bunch of Hamas, right? A bunch of Hamas militants who really wanted blood. Well, okay, but still, that's a slightly different story. And it's a story. I mean, Israel definitely wants to maximize the Sinwar himself is a monster narrative. And I just, maybe I'm being too picky, but to me, this part of the story was closer to actual news. That for the first time, we know that this scale of atrocity was not part of the plan. If they had found a document that just said that, that would be a story, right? Wouldn't that be a legitimate New York Times front page story? That's news. That's important news. And it's buried. And I don't know if it got any attention. I was on a meditation retreat, but it's buried in the story.
The article itself got attention, but what you've identified as what should have been the lead did not, at least not that I saw. Maybe just to stay on this a little bit longer, what are the implications of that story as it should have been written, do you think, in terms of Israel, like in terms of a potential ceasefire or working with Hamas?
Well, I think it makes it a little harder for Bibi and a lot of Israelis to say, look, Hamas, well, it makes it hard. It gets back to what the earlier thing we said. It makes it harder for them to say Hamas must be destroyed. They set out to slaughter all these civilians. Well, apparently they didn't, at least at the level of the command. Okay. And, I mean, we don't, he's not saying I regret the death of every single civilian, but this does cast doubt on the narrative that this was all part of the plan. And that's an important part of the rhetorical justification for persisting in the, in the onslaught in Gaza, in Israel's military onslaught. So it's just, as a rhetorical matter, it complicates life for Bibi if this is gets attention, which apparently it didn't.
Yeah.
So may seem like a small thing, but I don't know. And by the way, it's not totally unrelated to the controversy over the New York Times rape story, because the question wasn't whether rapes were committed. At least I don't think that was the smart version of the debate. The question, the New York Times story was cast. It didn't quite say this, but it was kind of cast as this was part of the strategy. Mass rape was part of the strategy. Didn't quite say that, but if you look at the billing and everything, that was the vibe, using rape as a weapon of war. And there was that kind of language. And that was really the question, was it some soldiers gone wild, or was it part of the plan? Was it systematic in the sense of being strategically initiated? This makes that claim less credible that it was. And these things matter, because they are, the more monstrous you can depict your enemy as, the easier it is to justify the continuation of what's going on in Gaza.
You want to talk about Russia, Ukraine now?
I mean, at some point we should probably move into overtime, right?
Yeah, I guess we could do that now.
let's say a little bit about Ukraine, and then bring down the Iron Curtain, which can be penetrated only by people who are paid subscribers of the Nonzero Newsletter. So yeah, what's your
Well,
take on?
it's similar to Israel Palestine in the sense that a lot of stuff, as I was saying, is happening, but the fundamental situation is unchanged. Russia has the upper hand militarily. The two sides seem very far from a peace deal or even a ceasefire. Putin did give a speech to senior members of the Russian foreign ministry in which he laid out his terms for a ceasefire. He said that Russia would stop fighting if Ukraine withdrew from the four provinces that Russia has annexed or says it has annexed, which are Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. And it's worth noting that last I checked, Russia doesn't actually fully control any of those provinces, not
Mhm.
even Luhansk, although I think it's pretty close
Pretty
there.
close.
Yeah. And he said he'd be open to a peace deal that involved a Ukrainian commitment to neutrality, protecting the rights of Russians in Ukraine, and then this denazification and demilitarization thing, which is still kind of vague. Um, and Putin made these remarks a few days before this global peace summit initiated by Ukraine, hosted by Switzerland. That whole thing was, frankly, kind of a farce. I mean, Russia wasn't invited. China declined to attend because Russia wasn't invited, and the U.S. sent Kamala Harris instead of Joe Biden. So the three leaders of the three most important countries didn't attend this summit. The meeting did produce this communique. It didn't set out like a viable peace proposal or anything. It called for things like uninterrupted food supplies, um, and yet, even though I didn't say anything hugely controversial, several nations didn't sign it, including some important ones. I have a list of the countries. So China, obviously, because it wasn't there, and then India, Indonesia, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Thailand, Brazil, and the UAE, and then obviously Russia. I mean, there's some
Mhm.
very important, like the two most populous and like the fourth most populous countries are on that list. And there was something kind of funny about the list of countries that did sign. That list included the Council of Europe, which is just like a human rights organization. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah. And then it included the European Commission, the European Council, the European Parliament. Those are all just bodies within the European Union. And then something called the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. So clearly there was some sort of effort to like artificially inflate that number
Although
of countries.
presumably the members of the EU
They also
signed
signed
independently, right?
independently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the overall effect in my kind of analysis is just to show that, the global south is really not on board with Western
Mhm.
opposition to Russia. There were some non-Western countries on the list, a lot of small countries and, partners of the US and such. This is looking to me more like a kind of clash of civilizations between Russia and the West than it is the international community against Russia. And the global south is kind of hedging its bets. So I thought that was interesting. And then just to put a couple other things that have happened on the table for discussion, Putin, for the first time in 24 years, went to North Korea, had a big meeting with Kim Jong Un. I actually think it's pretty significant. Russia recently sent a fleet of sea vessels, including a nuclear powered submarine and a warship, to Cuba. It docked in Havana for joint military exercises in the Caribbean. I also thought that was kind of significant. I mean, that's happened before, but not at this scale, apparently, not for years. Um, so yeah, what do you think? What do you think, for example, of like Putin's terms for a ceasefire and all that?
Um, I guess the question is whose proposal is more detached from reality, Ukraine's or Russia's? Um, Probably Ukraine's, because I think Putin is not saying that this is a precondition for talks, right? As I understand it, Zelensky's position is still that Russia has to withdraw all troops from Ukrainian territory before talks can start.
Yeah, and
And
then
of
they'll
course,
talk about having war tribunals and holding Putin accountable and
yeah,
reparations to Ukraine. That's their peace
yeah,
deal.
yeah, that sounds like a plan. Sure. No, I mean he knows that's not going to happen. Putin knows that they're not going to surrender all of these vast, pretty large areas that Russian troops don't even occupy. I mean,
Mm.
uh, but I think for him, you can see that as just a position he's staking out that he might give up in the course of talks, because I think he's willing to start talking without him agreeing to that. But in any event, look, apparently there's no near-term solution in the offing. I mean, you put some other things on the table there. Maybe we should go ahead and move into overtime, where we will also talk about, I got to talk about Willie Mays dying.
Mm.
And a little about the U.S. Open. Tragic outcome geopolitically. Tragic outcome of the U.S. Open. Quick lab leak update. I mean, I'm a little late on the update. And it's actually about a kind of debate that took place a couple of months ago that I just caught up with. And then I do want to talk more about Russia, Ukraine. I was going to talk a little about this AI situational awareness paper. I cover that in a podcast that will be released next week with this AI researcher, Jeffrey Laddish. So maybe I won't spend. I'll say a little about that just because it's good rant material. It's
And
getting a lot
that's
of attention in AI circles, and it has these geopolitical implications.
yeah, and
Unfortunately.
it's not about AI developing situational awareness. It's about being aware of the rate at which AI is improving and will
Right.
transform the world.
That's what he means. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we encourage people who aren't paid subscribers to become that and follow us into overtime. But if you don't, all we ask is that you spend the rest of the day smashing the like button and
Yes.
rating and reviewing. And anything else you want to say before we should wish people a happy Independence Day, because this will be the last Earthling Unplugged before that.
Yes. So smash the like button and happy Independence Day, or Interdependence Day, as we've been calling it.
That's yeah. I wrote a column a long time ago for Slate called Interdependence Day. That was kind of it was. Did you see the movie Independence Day?
Yeah.
Sci-fi
Mhm.
invaders.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Classic.
Well, you can imagine what moral of the story I try to draw attention to. Okay, so thanks everybody. We are heading into overtime.
This was a free preview of Earthling Unplugged. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive audio content, become an NCN member at nonzero.substack.com.